If you have noticed cherry blossom flowers growing in these clusters or bunches with lots of petals, then this is the Prunus Kanzan variety of the cherry blossoms. These are usually white, but nowadays you can see them in nice bright pink shades. So these flowers are often very difficult to paint, which is why I'm going to show you a technique how to paint this bunch of flowers. Hi and welcome to Run My Arts Watercolor tutorial series. And apologies if I sound a bit weird because I just recovered from flu. As usual, I'll be using the Kanzan XL Coral Press watercolor paper, 300 grams per square meter, and the size of the painting is A6, which is half of this A5 size. And today I'm going to use a ready-made pink shade from Deep Light brand. So this is the pink shade that I mentioned, and the name of this pink shade by Deep Light brand is Cherry Blossom, which is why I had the idea of just using this color palette. So apart from this pink shade, as usual I'll be using the Schmincke brand watercolors, which are my main watercolor paints, but it's just that the pink shade comes from this particular brand. So if you'd like to find out further about this brand, you can check out the links that I've left in the description section. But however, this video is not sponsored by them. I just thought of sharing the detail of the paint in case any one of you are curious about the paint and the brand. So moving on, I have pre-wet the paper before I start painting them. So as usual, just wet the paper thoroughly, and if you think there are too much of water blobs, you can just quickly absorb back those excessive water by placing a dry paper towel and then smoothing the rest of the water. So to kickstart, I am right away using the Cherry Blossom paint shade. As you can see here, I'm just trying to pick up the color and mixing it on the dish that I have. Okay, mix that up, and while the paper is still wet, as you already know, it's a pre-wet paper surface, so I'm just going to use those wet paint and paint in loosely some random shapes of the cluster of flowers. If you could recall from the reference photo, the flowers actually sitting in a bunch, so you can't really paint in detail those petals. So that's the objective of today's painting, where I am going to show you how to paint them in a very impressionistic way and freestyle. So we're not going to focus too much on the details of each and every petal, because it is going to be difficult to paint details on this type of flowers. So it'll be easier to use a round brush type and just make some circles like what I'm doing over here, some circular shapes that mimics the shape of the cluster of flowers. And with the same brush and paint shade, I am just quickly painting in the branches of the cherry blossom tree using the tip of the brush, because I do not want to risk using a dark shade, which could be sapphire or dark brown, that could accidentally bleed onto the parts of the cherry blossom flower. So which is why I'm painting first as an outline. I'll come back later to paint the actual color. And while the cherry blossom flowers are still wet, I am quickly using the micro brush. I am just quickly dabbing in some Indian yellow. You can use any yellow of your choice. You can even use a light green shade if you want to. I just thought of using an Indian yellow instead. So use a smaller size brush, and in my case is a micro size brush, and just dabbing in here and there where It indicates the middle part or pistil of the cherry blossom flowers. So once the painting is completely dry, I am just going to paint some leaves, foliage of the cherry blossom flowers, but I have not pre-wet, so basically it's just some wet paint onto the dry paper. And once again I'm using the micro brush, just painting the simple impressions of the foliages, that's all. And as you paint the foliages, you would want to be mindful with your brush strokes not to overlap the pink areas or the flower petals that we have painted earlier. So as you paint, don't forget to make an outline, or in other words, just avoid overlapping your leaf painting on the pink shades. So basically this would definitely remind you of negative painting, whereby you avoid painting the lighter areas and start focusing on the outer or other areas. And as you complete those painting, you will realize a new shape is being formed as you complete the outer part of the painting. In other words, you will notice the flowers shape forming as you complete the foliages around some of these bunch of cherry blossom flowers. So we're going to use the same negative painting technique after completing the leaf painting in order to reshape the entire bunch of these cherry blossom. I'm not sure if my explanation makes any sense to you at this moment, but I think as I complete the painting, you definitely get the idea of what I meant by applying the negative painting technique. Alright, the next step is to fine-tune some of the petals on the cherry blossom flowers. So I've mixed a little bit of permanent carmine from Schminke brand with the earlier pink shade, the cherry blossom pink shade that I had, and arrived at this slightly darker pink. I'm using the same micro brush to just paint in some impressions of lines actually. So I'm just basically painting some lines around and in between those lighter pink shades. And after applying these brush strokes, I am going to use another brush, which is a clean damp brush, and just brush it over onto those pink shade that I applied using the micro brush, and this will soften its look, and somehow this creates an impression of those ruffles like petals shape in this Kanzan cherry blossom flower, as you can see from the reference photo. You don't have to be very thorough about the brush strokes when making these ruffles like shapes or impression of the petals. Just randomly paint them. You can do it on the entire flower shape, or just partly on one corner of the flower head, or in the middle, and so on. So just be random about it, as long as you brush them over. After applying the paint, brush them over with the clean damp brush to give it a much more softer look. So this will create an impression of the darker and lighter areas on the flower head, and automatically will create an impression that there are a lot of tiny little petals in it. So which is why earlier in this video I mentioned that I'm going to show you a very impressionistic way of painting this bunch of flowers. Even in other medium, as in oil painting pastel or even acrylic, I'm sure the most artists would prefer using this approach to create an impression of those multiple petals in a flower. Though you can still attempt to make the very detailed painting, but then I would say you can only nail them when it's in a larger size painting format, probably an entire flower head as big as on a A3 size painting. But given the nature of watercolors that are transparent and not opaque, you can't keep layering with multiple petals with brush strokes. So hence the best way to go would be to create the contrast between the light and darker areas on the flowers, and this automatically would create the impression of folds, as in like I mentioned earlier, the ruffle like petals or multiple petals in a flower. And of course the negative painting technique helps you to maintain all those lighter areas. So I'm sure by now you would have noticed that this entire painting process has been sped up, because basically it's just repetitive process of brush strokes and softening them as I complete all the flower impressions on the cluster of branch. Alright, done with the flower cluster for the moment. So now it's time to fine tune the shapes of the outline of the flower bunch, and in order to do this we will have to paint the background. As you can see here, I am using a cool gray mix which has a bluish hint, and as I paint the background I am avoiding some areas, in other words the outline of the bunch, in order to create a highlight of further flower shapes, flower petals around the basic painting, that subject of the painting. As I said, I have applied the negative painting technique, so as I keep painting I always remember to leave or not to overlap some lighter areas of the flower bunch painting. So this will automatically create a lighter area of the flower bunch outline. So if you prefer to use a lighter shade, as in light green or pink or even brown, go ahead. I just thought a darker shade would be easier for me to demonstrate this method on the screen, so that will be easier for you to visualize it. I hope I have done justice on that part. So as I said earlier, just keep painting around the flower painting, basic flower painting that we have done earlier, but then do leave some whiter areas so that it creates an impression of highlights around the flower petals, or flower petals that are unseen, they are not so sharp, since this is a bunch of flower cluster. The more lighter areas, the bigger the entire branch looks. So keep painting them steadily, slowly and steadily. If you would like to pre-wet the area before painting this background, you may do so, but then it will be a bit difficult when you're painting closer to the flower heads, which is why I didn't prefer to pre-wet the painting area, and I thought of just doing it with the wet on dry method. And not to forget the gap in between the branches. So I'm just filling in those gaps, white areas, with the same bluish gray hint paint shade. And if the area of painting is too tiny, it's okay. You can just dab the paintbrush onto those white areas and then soften it later with a clean damp brush. The brush strokes need not be perfect. So once the painting is completely dry, you can start to paint the tree branches. I'm using Sapphire. You can use burnt umber, and just paint in those outlines that we made earlier in this painting with the pink shade. So now it'll be much more easy and worry free painting them, since the flower painting has been painted mostly, though I am going to come back to fine tune the flower heads. So I'm using a micro brush. You can also use a rigger brush, whichever suits your hand movement and also painting size. Next, I am painting the stamen or stigma, mostly stamen, into the middle part of the flower head, and you can use a darker shade, as in dark pink, magenta, or even red, a bright red. Just use a smaller size brush. I'm using the same micro brush so that you can achieve this fine line. Just marking it, don't have to be so detailed, just as long as it resembles the stamen on the cherry blossom flowers. So next I need to create some contrast onto the flower heads by painting in some shadows. So the color shade is gray. You can use a ready-made gray, or you can mix burnt sienna with a little bit of dark blue shade, as in ultramarine or sapphire blue. And I have dropped in a little bit of the pink shade that I've used earlier into this gray mix and arrive at this pinkish gray tone. So as you can see over here, I've applied it with the micro brush and soften it with a clean damp brush. So similar to the petal ruffles petal shape that I painted earlier in this video, I'm using the same technique, but this time using the gray shade. So I keep randomly painting it onto most of the flower heads to create an impression of the darker areas, so that the flowers shape look more fine-tuned. So instead of just maintaining the lighter areas, by applying this shadow, the flower painting does not appear flat and gives you that 3D look. So your flower looks more physical instead of just a 2D flat painting. So done with the shadow effect. Now I need some color pops. So I've decided to use a little bit of the pink shade, darker pink shade, which has the mix of permanent carmine or your crimson, and just lightly highlighting it or painting it with some minor brush strokes here and there onto some of the cherry blossom petals. Not everywhere, just a little bit here and there, just to give that extra color pop. So I am sure some of you would notice sudden change in the shape of the flowers, since there's too much of a washout effect on some of these flowers here. As I said, we need to tone down or find the balance between the lighter and darker areas. So by applying this red pop, it has reduced a little bit of that brighter areas or white shades, light shades on the flower, and fine-tune the shape further, similar to what the shadow effect has done to the entire flower bunch. Now I'm just applying some tiny little dots onto these stamen areas. A little bit of green shade to paint in the stem that holds some of the flowers. Of course, not all are visible, just a little bit here and there to give it an extra character to the entire painting. And extending the same green paint to fine-tune the earlier foliages that I've painted. So at this point of time, I've decided to repaint the entire background using the same bluish gray shade that I had earlier. If you'd like to skip this, then go ahead. I just thought of darkening it further. A little bit of paint spatters with a pink shade as well as some green shade, whatever shade that you prefer. A little bit of white gouache paint as well, and I'm applying it in the form of dots, not using the brush bristle but the end of the wooden holder of my brush, and just dabbing it to create some marks and textures onto the painting, just to have some fun and create some busy looking painting. That's what I always do. I don't want the watercolor painting to look boring. So spatters and some scribbles would help the entire watercolor painting look busy and interesting. You can also apply the white gouache paint by scribbling some highlights onto some of the flower petals. And with this, the painting is complete. So what do you think of my Kanzan Cherry Blossom bunch? So if you liked the method that I've shared, then do hit the like and share button, and also subscribe to my channel. And I thank you all for your support. So see you in another tutorial. Bye.